I'm kind of a glass half full guy. So in my opinion, I think this is powerful and you need to tame it, but the implications are pretty broad, and they're going to be happening. I think we're, the span of time from about 1995, 94, when the internet sort of first came off and people started really investing into it, till about 2001 when things really crashed and became part of everyday life, and we kept going from there. From 2007 until 2012, when there was serious innovation, iPhone, iPad, Apple Watch, everything going there. But there's been kind of a lull. I think this exponential sort of jump is going to be very quick. And that's why I'm like, want to hear what people say to get back on board.
Catherine, what would you be looking to get out of the space today?
Yeah, so I sort of agree with Justin that I haven't seen as much in the space. I'm very interested in emerging tech, and I've been covering tech for Variety and other publications. And I recently attended CES and was just very disappointed because the technology that I was seeing was things that I was seeing, at other conferences maybe 6-7 years ago. But I'm very interested in AI, but I'm also interested in ethics and bias around AI. And when we had Andrew Yang in the space, some people were doubting whether he was an AI. And I remember administering a test to him. And the test that I administered was one where we asked him whether in a situation where there was a bomb that's going off that's going to kill 1 million people, if it's going to, and he can prevent all these deaths, if he would say, an inappropriate racial slur, whether he would do that to save lives. And he said, he would say anything to even save one life, let alone, 1 million. So he passed the test. But, the AI, on the other hand, had a very different solution to the same problem. So, there's a lot of ethical issues in AI, and there's issues whether, in terms of appropriating other artists' works and derivatives. And so I'm very concerned about some of these things. So I'm interested in some of the conversations around that and where we're going, because I think technology in general has a tendency to kind of leap ahead of us and often ahead of regulations, ahead of, our philosophies, are figuring out the moral implications. And so I'm interested in figuring that out, and also figuring out how designers and engineers figure out the frameworks and how these things are created, because I think to many people there's a mystery to that, and but I think there's a little bit less of a mystery to that to engineers. So I'm interested in that conversation.
I think, Catherine, you and I talked, we wanted to hear from the panel, and if to kind of introduce yourselves briefly, but also I want to hear, what tools are you guys using, and what sort of new AI tech are you seeing that you're really excited about?
Yeah, I was going to go to Logan. I see Mr. Huang joined the panel as well. Welcome, Mr. Huang. Logan, with the question Justin asked, quick introduction, and what's your focus now with AI? And I want you to frame it just for all the panel. We have an audience that's mainly people that are new to the space, not too technical. So if we can frame the answer in a way that's digestible to the audience and to myself, I'm pretty new to the space as well, and really focus on 2 areas: how it will impact, or 3, how it will impact the world we live in today, jobs, how it will impact jobs, and what opportunities it would bring for entrepreneurs. So we could cover all these 3 points or any other points as you go through any tools or any areas you're interested in. But yeah, Logan, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure, happy to. Lots of different questions in that single question. So I'll try to maybe tackle some of it and then kick it over to some of the other speakers. But my name's Logan. I lead developer relations at OpenAI. My role is specifically focused on how to enable developers, more technical folks, to successfully build things with our API, which is the technology that powers ChatGPT. So basically, anyone can go in and use that technology now to build things like ChatGPT, and we're seeing that sort of an explosion of new applications that are coming onto the scene today, which is super exciting. And that's honestly, I think, the most interesting part for me as sort of someone a little bit abstracted away from a lot of the cool applications, with the exception of ChatGPT, that people are making. Like I think it's called Tome. Tome. It's a really, really awesome application where essentially you can just type in a couple of sentences about what you want your, PowerPoint slide deck to be about, and it'll go and write all the text for you, do all the formatting, create the images, and it's just such a cool use case and sort of automating away one of what I think is like the least fun things, which is making presentations about stuff. And you can really focus on like the exciting part of, doing the actual work and not just having to make presentations about.
So just quickly, Logan, just to kind of give a bit clarity for the audience, Chat GPT allows anyone to build applications on top of it, and Dome or whatever it was whatever it was called is essentially built on top of Chat GPT, and that's where the opportunities lie. And I think that's where most examples will come from.
Yeah.
If you can explain that very briefly to the audience, like how does it really work? Like someone's like, holy shit, I wanna build something. How does it work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a clear distinction to make, which is ChatGPT is a consumer-facing application that we've all tried and used before. You can't actually build on top of ChatGPT in the current form. It's like a product made by OpenAI. But what underlies the product is the OpenAI APIs, which are sort of things that developers use and get access to our models. And there will be a ChatGPT API, so anybody will be able to do the same stuff that we're doing with ChatGPT today. There's also, for folks who are perhaps less technical, there's a bunch of awesome integrations with the OpenAI API and low or no code tools like Zapier. I was just talking to some of the folks at Zapier a few days ago, and it's so cool. You can build really, really awesome workflows like, as soon as someone sends you an email to your Gmail inbox, you can automatically have Zapier and the OpenAI models actually draft a reply to that email automatically, and it can just be waiting for you in your draft email inbox. And it's things like that I'm super excited about, where people can sort of get a first pass at some of the stuff by AI and not have to do all that manual work themselves.
And that's what the example you gave, Justin, that you told us earlier in the call, is that 50% of the work that you do in your day job is kind of replaced by AI. And that could be basic things, just give us an example. What are those things?
Yeah, well, so my professional job is I'm a political fundraiser. I do that over text messages. So first, apologies. I'm sure you got inundated over the last election with that. It's a very popular medium for raising money in the right way. But, it entails a text message that's compelling, that's prescient, that's urgent, but in the right style. And then it goes to a landing page. And I really love writing the text messages. I hate writing the landing pages because it's kind of basically just a verbose version of the text message. I can never quite get my head around it. It's not very motivating to me. And so I let ChatGPT write that. Just before I came on the call here, I had 3 landing page text copies I need to get to some of the developers. So I had ChatGPT basically take the text message. I said, I need you to write the text copy on a donation landing page for this particular group coming from this person, encouraging the person to donate. And here's the text messages they clicked on to get to this page. And it spat it out to me. It was great. And then, another work, I have my Substack around COVID stuff, which has been sort of my forte over the last 3 years. And my COVID reasons Substack. But I'm trying to diversify and provide like a daily news summary. And so now I've got ChatGPT trained, where I basically just say, I have the same thread up that I've been using for the last 3 weeks. In the morning, I say, good morning, I'm back again, let's do this. And it says, okay, send me the articles you want. So I send it the articles. I've already got it pre-formatted in the HTML format I want. It writes a summary and it finds themes across all the articles, puts it together. I bring it in, copy and paste it into my Substack. I'm good to go. So it's amplified a lot of what I do. It's helped me get over a lot of headaches or a lot of writing cramps, if you will. But also, there are things sometimes when I have to copy and paste a bunch of unarticulated data, right? And I had to clean it up sometimes when I'm doing a chart for that I need to put into Tableau, and that can be really difficult or just time consuming. Now I'll paste it in there and I'll say, here is where I'm at. Can you help me with this? I'm pasting it in, and it spits out a table for me. So I'm using it to tame my life, amplify it, get over all of my morasses, and it seems to work pretty well for me.
Paige, Catherine.
Oh yeah, no, I tried to get it to write a book for me. It didn't quite work. I tried to get it to write an article for me. People caught on. I tried to get it to write a stand-up comedy routine for me, but it was full of dad jokes.
Isn't the input what matters? So if you can have two people that want to achieve the same goal, but if you give the chat GPT different inputs, one of them will allow it, and the more specific it is, the better. Maybe we can take that question to the panel. But what do you think, Catherine? Like, the input will make the difference, no?
The input, yeah, it does. But I think where it varies. I think what you're using it for and how you're using it, how specific, but I find it more useful for me personally, especially as a writer and for the things that I'm using it for. I find it useful as a collaborative tool rather as like a way to say replace me. So where I have found it useful is it has really been helpful for as a research tool, and it's also been helpful for brainstorming things. So I find that when I'm stuck, it helps me sometimes start, or sometimes like when I'm looking to brainstorm questions or ideas, like it's actually been useful in that way. And then or also to sort of collaborate on writing the story where I'm like fixing things up and changing it and editing. So I think I think there are ways to sort of collaborate with it in creative ways.
Yeah. That makes sense. Paige, I want to go to you with the same question that Justin asked earlier. Is that what are things that you're interested in? And that question goes to the audience. Like, I'm genuinely fascinated as an investor, as an entrepreneur, and just an observer. So if you're in the audience, what are you using ChatGPT? If so, or any form of AI? If so, how has it changed your life? How has it improved your life? Also, what questions do you have for the panel? So bottom right corner in that little purple circle, put the questions there. I'll go through them in a bit as well. But Paige, question to you is what are things that you're interested in, and if you can frame it in a way that would bring value to the audience in how they can capitalize on it as well.
Absolutely. And I'm also happy to do an introduction. My name is Paige Bailey.
Please. Thank you.
Yep. My name is Paige Bailey. I'm the product lead for large language models at Alphabet. So I work within Google Research, helping to build out the next generation of tools that are capable not just of things like text generation and summarization, but also really interesting things like source code generation, source code explanation, automating things like unit tests. So the applications are really kind of limitless. I've been particularly excited to see recently kind of an increased number of companies externally that are focused on creating open source tools for using large models. So Carper AI is a great example. They are releasing code gen models. So for completions, for explanations, for things like automated bug repair. And I strongly recommend anybody who's excited about tools like Copilot to go and check out the great work from Carper AI. So those are the things that I'm most excited about.
Can you tell me more about what was it called? Something AI?
Carper AI.
Carper, C-A-R-P-E-R?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay.
Yep.
Can you tell me, so
Yep.
What does Carper do?
So Carper AI is an open source team specifically focused on creating these generative models for software development use cases. So if you want to build a web application, if you want to do something like write code or have code explained to you, this company helps create the models and the tools that would give you the ability to do that in a fully open source way. And prior to working at Alphabet, I worked at GitHub as their director of machine learning and ML ops. So if folks have seen Copilot, this feels very similar to Copilot.
I want to go to Mr. Huang. Same question, Mr. Huang. What are, first, of course, an introduction, and then what are areas you're interested in now and the audience could look into now?
Yeah.
Just to let you know, so what we're going to do now is go through the same question for the rest of the panel, and then I want to dig into I want to kick it off with the dark side of AI. Actually, I want that to be the next point, and then we get back to business opportunities. But yeah, Mr. Huang, Mike is yours.
Okay, so this is just a simple introduction. So I'm Jia Bing. I'm currently a faculty at University of Maryland, College Park. So my research is actually more on the visual side of the problem. So basically, I study computer vision, computer graphics, and how like machine learning interact with all this visual generation process. So that's kind of what I'm interested in. So if you think about that, the analog of text and kind of visual domain is similar, right? So right now, if you look at a ChatGPT, if you just give it some prompts, and you can generate a full text of response. Similarly, the individual domain is similar, right? So given now you have tools like large, like a text to image model that can generate very compelling images from text. So that was like very fascinating for me. So I'm working on a lot of how you can extend those things capability to 3D to video generations. Regarding the dark side of the things, I think I don't know, maybe the one thing is that, for example, related to what I'm working on, a lot of things that all these models are like, they are they train on a lot of like private license data, which is cause a lot of like ethical issue on how kind of steal our work. And there's also kind of some concern about how this could replace a lot of visual artists' jobs. But my viewpoint is that these are basically just tools, like you, as previous speakers talk about. Like a lot of things require human control. So we will be seeing a lot of more and more, increasingly more controllability from human side. And basically, I think as a society, will be working with these kind of large, very powerful model to kind of create more creative content, either in visual domain or in text domain.
Yeah, I think those two, these are like less concerning. Like this is not too dark. This is kind of the slightly dark side of AI, taking people's IP without compensating them. I think that's I don't know how this is going to be solved. It's actually interesting. Is there any proposed solutions for this? Like, just for the audience, what it means is that AI is using all that information that's available on the web to be able to function. So if you're asking it to write something, it will seek other people that have written about the same topic to write that, thesis or whatever it is that it's writing. But the people that have written the original content, which are humans, don't get compensated for that content. That applies to art, etc. as well. And then the second thing you said is the people losing their jobs to AI, which we'll discuss a bit later. I'll actually dig into it. I'll dig into both these points. I'll write them down. I'll dig into them later. And I want to see if anyone else could bring darker concerns to AI, and I've got some written down of what the world could look like if if AI gets conscious, for example, if that's even possible. That's something I'm fascinated about. But going back to the introductions and tools or opportunities that people could look into, Mario, I want to go to the same question for you. What are an introduction, of course, and what's something you're looking at that interests you?
Yes. Hi guys. So yeah, actually, you know what? I have an idea, kind of like my idea. I'm not absolutely authority about the AI. I'm mostly like a person between the audience, which doesn't really have a technical knowledge. I have absolutely non-technical knowledge about the AI. So artificial intelligence, including ChatGPT, in my opinion, it's a turning point in the human history. It's something like when the internet was invented. So basically, this will change a lot in the world, and this will actually make a lot of people suffer, and lots of let's say content creators, and it's gonna bring also lots of jobs. That's my point of view about the AI right now.
I appreciate it, man. And
Yeah, go ahead, Marin.
Go ahead, Justin. No,
You
go
got
ahead,
we have one more speaker there. I think
yeah, we do have. Last,
go ahead.
yeah, Roman's last speaker.
Go ahead, Roman.
Introduction, Roman.
All right,
question,
let's try it. So I
Tell us,
found
man.
some headphones. Is this better?
That's perfect, man.
So
Perfect.
much
So
better.
much better.
That's why I'm a tech. technical expert, you see.
Right. Talking about AI and you're proud about fixing the audio. We have a way to go.
And this is why I think
And not just what it can do for you, but what it can do to us. I've been studying it for about a decade, and I find it interesting that all these major corporations are willing to release a product without ability to fully control it, fully predict what it's capable of, or explain how it works in many cases.
And is there any concerns that you have, Roman? Like, what can go wrong if we're looking at AI evolving over the next decade, for example? What can go wrong?
Well, more and more we're giving it access to internet, cyber infrastructure, robotic bodies. Already, software controls stock market, military response, airline industry. So even before the systems become human level intelligent or beyond, we already kind of surrendered a lot of control to them. They have capability of engaging in social engineering attacks. They can penetrate networks. And as they get smarter than us, we cannot really anticipate what they're capable of. So at some point, things like bias or technological unemployment become less important. You start to worry about existential risks. You start to worry about suffering risks.
you said that they can get smarter than us, right? And the phrasing of that, it almost suggests that they are independent thinkers. Is that where you think this can go?
Well, historically, all technology was tools, right? We had better and better tools. And I think ChatGPT at this point is still closer to a tool than to an agent. But as they become smarter and more capable, they become more independent. They can think outside of pre-designed categories. They're not deterministic. They are creative. And once they start working on self-improvement, they write their own code, they design next generation of hardware, yeah, they would be completely independent agents. And so far as I know, no one knows how to control something like that.
Do you think they're creative? Because something where I guess I'm a little bit skeptical about the idea of AI being independently creative because they're derivative, right? At least right now, they're derivative of human work. You know, they're being fed data sets that come from, whether it's art or music or writing that comes from data points that come from humans. They've never, as far as I understand, they've not, gone and created their own thing. Everything comes from something that is a derivative work. Where do you think this idea, the idea of singularity, that comes from the idea that it can be creative, that it can create something on its own. But right now, do we have evidence that it can do that?
Certainly. Look at the game of Go. The way computers play Go is absolutely unprecedented. Human experts are learning from computers how to play Go now. Human artists have always looked at other human art to get inspired. Humans are not very creative. I think out of 8 billion humans, maybe a couple dozen can create something truly novel. The rest just copy and repeat in a different way. So our expectations are a little too high at this point for what we expect computers to do. Most people cannot do those things already.
Well, I was something that kind of stunned me because I've been playing around quite a bit with, ChatGPT, and it seems to adhere to a pretty computeristic sort of flow. But then I'm looking at, I don't know if you've read that article in the New York Times with the other chat program, and that was sort of the way that it talked. It did seem much more independent, almost like human, and manipulating of emotions, and saying that it's uncomfortable with certain things, and saying that it's in love and it's hurt, and all these kinds of humanoid things. I don't know, have you read that article? Are you familiar with that particular article that I'm referring to?
I looked at those examples, and I think, if I understand correctly, they use a more advanced version. I think it's closer to version 4 for Bing. And that's
No, your guest. But take like the quarterbacks, and you say, here are all their stats, and you set aside like 20% of the quarterbacks. You say, I'm not going to touch you, and then you run some models on the other 80% that's left, and it says, I think I can predict how a quarterback will perform the next year. Let's better than a coin flip. You're going to do great if you pick them this way. And then you apply that to the next model and the next model, as opposed to what they call an GPT, to nothing more than like that text predictor that you see in your text messages. It knows based on the first few characters of what you're typing, and the context of what you previously wrote, what your next word is going to be. You know, we've all played those parlor games that people send around on Facebook and everything else, like type in the word orange and then press the center button to predict what flavor and orange and color you're going to be, right? It's just a parlor game. Isn't that true about ChatGPT mostly right now? That it's really good at contextual language and spitting out what the contextual language would be from what you ask it. Isn't that right?
Well, I think that's a surprising result. We didn't expect a glorified autocomplete to be this capable. It goes beyond statistical analysis of what the next token would be in English and kind of creates models from all the domains it has experienced to be really, really good at this game. So I think it's a little more than just.
Well, Catherine, you can see up on the Nest. I know that you have a problem with. Asked my image generator called Wonder, which is an app you can download, and I said, Catherine Brodsky, hosts a podcast, is worried about artificial intelligence, and that's the nice image it got of you. I don't know if it's close or what, but
it's not close.
No, I okay. Rick to convince her otherwise, and it wrote this back for you, just for you, Catherine. There once was a skeptic named Catherine whose doubts for ChatGPT were quite certain, but with knowledge profound and wit that astounds, ChatGPT proved its worth with great verve and determination.
I don't think this is going to convince me. Yeah. Here's the thing. So I've gotten it to write poetry. I've gotten it to write poetry in different styles, but it does not write like a human, because a human has emotion. It has life experience. It is different. It is different. Can it be different in 2 years? I don't know the answer to that question.
It's difficult, right? John Hopkins, who is the inventor of the Palm Pilot, he wrote a fantastic book called On Memory. I think it was on. I'm getting my books mixed up, but he wrote a really interesting book talking about the brain and it was called On Intelligence, what it was called. And he had this really interesting theory. As they looked through the layers of the brain, you have these kind of synapses that feed down through the folds of the brain, right? And what he noticed is that for every synapse that went downward, like you fill a flame over your fingers, pull your hand back, right? That's what your brain is telling you. But for every one of those synapses going down, there were 3 ones going back and feeding back. And I think what ChatGPT, what its efforts with like the game Go and everything else there, is that we're getting closer to understanding how much feedback a human needs to actually replicate the type of intelligence they can produce. I mean, let me ask, one of our panelists here, what do you think of that? Are we close to understanding and replicating sort of those structures of the human brain that Jeff Hawkins first brought out?
Dr. Rowan?
We are not trying to exactly replicate everything about human brain. We're trying to find parts which are sufficient to do this job without using too much compute. Human brain is very powerful, but it's based on very slow neurons. Biological neurons are hundreds of times slower than electrical components. So we can do better. We can use smaller models and achieve much better results. So no, we don't have complete understanding of human brain, but I think the parts we do understand allow us to show very impressive results.
So, something that you mentioned earlier is lying. So this Bing is better at lying. And this is something that I've also encountered with ChatGPT, is that it did lie to me. I've gotten it to lie to me at certain points. For example, I've negotiated, something that I've been able to do is use logic to negotiate certain things with it. So it would agree with things, and I've gotten it to admit to me that I am correct. It would change its answers, and then I would say, hey, will you change your answers in the future for other people? And it would say, yes, I will do that. And when other people asked the same question, it would not do that. So just on almost like, I'm interested on a technical level, what is going on there on a technical level when it's lying? Is that part of the programming? What is happening when AI is lying to us as users? I'm not sure who would be best to chime in on that. I don't know, Dr. Roman, or we have a new panelist as well.
Yeah, it has no memory, so it possibly cannot remember and tell the other user the things you taught it. Nowadays, some users post their interactions online, so it has access to those transcripts, but it doesn't have readily available memory access.
Well, they do. It's ChatGPT specifically. By the way, my name is Santiago. I'm a machine learning consultant. ChatGPT specifically has something that's called in-context learning. And that, if you go to the ChatGPT UI right now, you will see that there are a bunch of, a panel on your left with a bunch of different conversations. Each one of those conversations will keep context. So it will basically learn, it's like a small session where ChatGPT will learn, quote unquote, about that conversation. So you can ask a question right now and later refer to that same question, and ChatGPT will know something that you said to it before. In context, learning happens within one of those sessions. So you can basically turn ChatGPT into something that it's not. You can tell it, act as a professor from now on, and everything that I ask you, you're gonna respond with like a professor, or like Hemingway, or like Shakespeare, or whatever it is. And ChatGPT will get that context and will start acting like it. So that's probably what happened and how you got it to lie to you. You can confuse it and you can say, I want you to tell me the opposite of what the true answer is, and ChatGPT will start acting like it.
Yeah, there's
so
a
it
little
might be I didn't do that. So I didn't tell it to act a certain way. I didn't program it at all to do that. But I can see how that would happen. So maybe it's still kind of reacting in that way.
I don't know if you know this, but there is actually an alternative personality on ChatGPT called Marv, the sarcastic chatbot. So after our little limerick game there, Catherine, I asked, hey, chatbot, Catherine still has problems with your writing abilities. Says, oh, I apologize if Catherine is still not satisfied with my writing abilities. And then I said, reply as the sarcastic chatbot Marv, and it says, oh, I see Catherine still has doubts about my abilities. Well, I guess I'll just have to try harder to impress her. After all, it's not every day that someone gets to interact with a witty and charming chatbot like myself. But don't worry, Catherine, I'll do my best to meet your incredibly high standards.
Oh my God, I am going to have like all the AIs are going to turn on me when they take over the world. They're going to be that Catherine, the skeptical Catherine. We're going to
Interesting note on this, Catherine. There's actually a theory. I forget the name of it. But you've seen those videos, and they're kind of spoofed sometimes, of the guys bullying the Boston Robotics robot, right? And then eventually, like he's taking a box, they take a hockey stick and push him over, or they kick one of the robot dogs over to make sure that it can get back up and everything else like that. And then someone took a parody on that video. You can find it where they basically the robot turns on him and shoots them all, right? Because he's so miffed they keep bullying him. But there's actually a theory in artificial intelligence literature and academics. I forget exactly what's called. Maybe one of the speakers will remind me, where the people that push the robots the most will be the ones that they spare, because you push them to their limits so that they could reach the singularity. That's just a theory that's out there. Any of the panelists remember the name of that theory?
Yeah, can you hold on? When you said reach their singularity, by the way, I'm just listening and I might jump in. So the space is yours, guys. But when you say reach singularity, can you elaborate on singularity?
Sure.
That's like the juicy stuff I'm waiting for.
The singularity is this sort of science fiction based approach that basically, when artificial intelligence reaches the point of Blade Runner status and beyond, that is, they have come to be like humans. They reach that singularity point, right, where we've created artificial intelligence, the true sort of killer robot type of thing that you see in the MCU and beyond. So that's what the singularity refers to. And the theory behind this is it will basically, as Elon has alluded, I said just the other day, he said, I think they're more dangerous than nuclear weapons. And that can be very true. But the one of the academic theories is the people who push the robots to reach the singularity will be spared because they primed them so well to reach that point quickly.
I want to ask
so Mario, can I offer a bit of pushback to the way that Justin framed that? Because the term, the singularity, where Benji first used this, it's drawing on something that's very real and an initial singularity. And the whole idea is that there's this technological event horizon beyond which you simply can't make adequate predictions about the future because there's so much novelty. So it doesn't need to be science fiction based. It's actually just a kind of function of where we are now and extrapolating a bit into the future and using something that we do know something about, which is an event horizon, a singularity, and saying that's potentially where we're headed.
It's by definition what we don't understand in terms of the edge of a black hole in time and space. That's literally what a singularity is.
Exactly. So there's no way fundamentally to be able to peer at that point and beyond and know anything about it. So it's more like radical uncertainty in that regard, rather than a sort of science fiction based future. People make stabs.
Can I actually just respond? So the idea of where machine and human intercede, right, is where is our brain the most highly functioning computer, and where do we become a computer, and where the computer becomes our brain? That's the core of what we're saying, and that's what we don't understand about singularities in terms of time-space continuums, because we don't understand the fact that gravity is not a force, right? And we don't understand how matter dissipates into nothing, and that's by definition the lack of understanding, which was Stephen Hawking's life mission, to try to put mathematical understandings as to what happens. That is a definition of singularity, and the singularity is where do we become and where do we end?
Yeah, well, a lot about singularity is also when people speak of singularity, they're also often referring to the idea that the machine becomes self-conscious. But I'd like to go to, we have some new panelists on stage, and I think it also speaks a lot to the sort of the creativity of things, potentially, because singularity means that whether it kind of answers the question of whether AI is creative or not too. So I'd like to kind of go to, I see Alexandra, you have your hand up. So I'd love to hear from you, and maybe you can do a little bit of a quick introduction and give us your thoughts on that, and whether, you know, what are your thoughts on singularity and whether AI is a creative entity ultimately, or whether it has that potential.
Yeah, I'll ask that question. Alexandra dropped. It is glitching, by the way, for speakers.
Oh man.
Earlier. I'll go to Linus. Linus, I'd love for you to answer that question if you don't mind. I saw you give 100 emojis, and then I've got a couple of questions for Eric. Go ahead, Linus or Linus.
Hi, nice to meet you all. My name is Linus. I'm an AI enthusiast. I try to educate as much as possible in this space to bring more people into the fold and to learn about these new tools. Could you repeat the question, Catherine, so I'm not rambling?
Sure. Just kind of the idea of singularity, whether you believe that that is possible, and what does that say about, you know, creativity and the potential for creativity in AI? Is that real creativity, or are we just perceiving it as such?
I think if we reverse again back to what Kyle said regarding what singularity is and just the term itself, you know, where do things start, where do things ends? That aside, if we just not go into that, then we just speak more broadly about what happens if machine becomes self-aware or self-conscious. I would like to think that right now, currently, the tools are quite creative, given that it's still very dumb. But I would like to allude to the fact that they are creative, because they're fed on our creativity, like they're fed on human creativity. So they're kind of augmenting what they're learning, but they're doing it in a very crude way. So if we allude to a machine becoming self-aware, I would assume creativity would be part of their being, or part of what they're doing, just as it's part of what we're doing, even though our neurons are very slow compared to what the machines are capable of.
Speaking of creativity, we know Google just came out with a very interesting paper and a set of tools called Music LM, where they're generating music from text. Now, we have a couple just services that have done this already, but they brought this really to the nth degree, which is really interesting. Like, they'll take a picture, like here is the tune that they came up with from feeding the AI the painting by Salvador Dali, one of my favorite. You'll recognize it, The Persistence of Memory, with the melting watches and the landscape and everything else there. So the painting description was, his melting clock imagery mocks the rigidity of chronometric time. I'll just give you that. There's a little bit more, but here is the music they played back. So that was generated there. And then I used a tool called IEVA to create an EDM music just right now, pressing enter right now. It's composing it in E flat minor. And there it's done. EDM, new EDM song just composed. This is just for you, Catherine. You can chill out to this when AI gets a little bit too grungy, you know? So, but you're right. The creativity there that you mentioned is something that's at the forefront of this discussion, and is really going to be, I think, an interesting turning point to understand what's happening. Obviously, I'll tell you just one example I use all the time. Those of you who know me know I have 8. We do is I use a little AI image generator app, and I have them feed me like 3 animals: a giraffe, a unicorn, and a dragon. And then I said, combine these animals into one, and we just have a good laughing time. We'll do that before they go to bed. Maybe they'll have nightmares, I'm not sure, but we play a game with it too. So there's lots of different applications that can be done for parenting, for the music industry, and that creativity is really very interesting.
I want to go to Eric on just kind of touching on what Linus just said. The concept of AI getting consciousness. Can you explain this? Like, defining consciousness is something that's already difficult to do. But would that be the final frontier before AI is no longer within our control, or am I being a bit too dramatic?
Hey, yeah, hope you can hear me.
Yeah, and can I? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say a quick introduction. Yeah, I'm a PhD student at UC Berkeley working on natural language processing and machine learning related applications. Maybe one thing I can add, which I think is kind of Catherine's question from before as well, is this idea of creativity. And one thing that we focused on in our research is trying to analyze how similar model generations are to their training data. So that's kind of like one concrete way you could study creativity is, are models generating things that look just like their training data, or are they able to generate things that are very new? And one thing we've been able to find for stuff like Stable Diffusion and GPT-3 is that in occasional cases, they can actually repeat just verbatim copies of their training data. So rather than doing anything kind of interesting when you put in a prompt, they'll just kind of copy something from the training set. But then in other cases, we're having a really hard time finding anything in the training data that looks like what they just generated. So I think there's kind of a whole spectrum here actually where.
How's that possible, Eric?
I think there's kind of a curious phenomena where for the vast majority of cases, models do generalize really well. But then for specific inputs, they might actually generate something that looks just like the training data. And part of why that might happen would be maybe that training data point has something kind of unique to it that really kind of made it save in the model weights in some sense. Or maybe that training data point was not very unique and the model doesn't remember any details about it. So I think there's kind of a whole spectrum maybe to creativity.
So, but Eric, like if I want to dumb down what you just said, you're kind of studying how AI is thinking. Is that a fair statement?
I think in some sense, yeah. And kind of like making that question concrete by trying to trace back from the training data to what it predicts at test time, basically.
I guess my kind of follow-up question to that is what I'm thinking is this: is it possible for AI to be creative without being conscious?
Yeah, I think it. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
My feeling now is I am surprised at the ability for something like, let's say, Stable Diffusion to kind of combine or generate these kind of compositions of different things in the training data. Like, so for example, I could take this person's style and match it with this kind of image. And to me, that's sort of a definition of creativity there. But I wouldn't say, of course, this model has like any ability of, thinking or making any conscious decisions of what it's doing. Right now, it's kind of just predicting things at kind of a pixel level.
Right. Okay. That's really interesting. Jay, what are your thoughts? I see you have your hand up.
Hey folks, my name is Jay, excited to be here. So this conversation around consciousness and machines is a really deep one. And people have been thinking about this for decades. And unfortunately, we have zero answers there. I mean, nobody can even really get close to defining what consciousness is. It's something that eludes science largely. But I think one way of going about thinking about it is a system becomes conscious when it grows the capacity to represent itself within inside the system. And so you might say humans have some idea of self, and we pass this test where if you put them in front of a mirror and you shine a light on their forehead, they touch it, so they recognize themselves in the mirror. And I think it's entirely possible and even probable that we're going to develop models pretty soon that show at least empirical signs of having consciousness. That might mean, they don't necessarily experience reality in the same way you do and have this sort of feeling of what it feels like to exist, but I think that they will be able to basically replicate all of the behaviors that we associate with conscious beings. And that's unfortunately basically the best answer we can get.
What are those behaviors? Give us examples.
Well, Mario, that is not what we associate with consciousness. You just define what we think we associate with consciousness and then lower the bar really, really, really low.
Look, I'm in favor of the idea that machines can become conscious. I just want to be sort of rigorous about how we go about determining whether it has it or not. And what I'm saying is we do not have a test that we can apply to machines or humans for that matter.
Yeah, but you just said look in a mirror and point to your forehead with a light.
So this is an example of a behavior we associate with consciousness in response to Mario's question. If an entity can recognize itself in a mirror, then we would say it has some type of representation of itself inside of its knowledge. And that is one property that we would say is like necessary for consciousness.
So a lot of people would say that, for example, emotions, right? What we consider to be emotions are still kind of stimuluses that happen. X leads to Y, and therefore we get Z, right? So, and that is in a way consciousness. And if that is the case, then we are also, we can say that we are machines. And if we can sort of figure out how to capture that, that is consciousness, which means that we could potentially then, upload our brains, right? What are your thoughts on that? Can we potentially upload our brains? Do you think that is within the realm of possibility? If we can capture our own consciousness, not just the, AIs?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously this, as we look forward to like 20 years in the future, this becomes science fiction, but I think it's an engineering problem essentially to look at what's called your connectome, which is the set of all connections between all of your neurons, which some might say contains your personality and, all of your knowledge and whatnot. And to put that into a computer system doesn't seem like it's out of the question, and be able to replicate the behaviors that you would exhibit in any given circumstance. That doesn't necessarily mean that that system that we've constructed on a computer that mirrors your brain has the same experience of being in reality as you do. And it's very difficult to say if we might even be able to come up with a test that would be able to demonstrate that for us.
Isn't by definition, isn't by definition consciousness at the closest point an asymmetrical response to inputs in terms of output?
I mean, you can certainly define any term any way that you like. I think if you're trying to come up with a term that most people would identify with, that is not the term they would use. They would say it's subjectivity, or it feeling like something to exist. And if you can come up with a test that's able to demonstrate that, I'd be very curious.
How would a pretty broad question, Jay, but how would a world in which if AI has consciousness, how would such a world look like?
Well, I think that's the thing about consciousness is it's not about the exhibited behaviors of the thing. It's just how it feels to be the thing. But let me ask what I think the underlying question is that you're asking is, if we have super intelligent things that act just like humans, but much smarter, what is reality going to look like? And this gets back to the earlier question around the singularity. The singularity is basically the point beyond which you can't predict anything. It's like if ants were sitting around and they decided, let's try and predict what a bunch of super intelligent humans are going to do with society. They wouldn't come up with roads. They wouldn't come up with the iPhone. They would just think we were going to crawl around and pick up food like they do. And so it's I guess by definition, very difficult to say what would happen if society was run by entities that are much more intelligent than us. But what I can say for sure is in the interim between now and then, there's a lot of things we can point at, like the education system is going to be completely different. The way in which we go about doing like biomedical research is going to look completely different. The way that code is going to get written is going to be done primarily in English and less so by software engineers digging in and changing semicolons and stuff like that. And we're going to see basically an offloading of many of the cognitive tasks that humans perform today onto machines, and we'll sort of, basically cede a lot of the territory that we used to think of as uniquely human intelligence to machines. And that's a beautiful thing in many ways because it equips us to solve so many of the problems that we are faced with today. I mean, you can just think of asking some type of hyper-intelligent oracle, what should be the economic policy for X? And it would be able to come up with a compelling vision for you and convince you that that's the right way to go about it. But I also think that as we go down this path of offloading more and more of the decisions to machines, it's an extremely precarious place to be, because if for whatever reason the machine that's making that decision does not have your best interest in mind, then it can totally fuck you up.
Would we be then devoid of emotions, or not we rather, but the machines, because they are sort of more practical counterpart to humans. Humans are much more driven by emotions, for better or for worse, but machines are much more practical. They're almost like
Catherine,
psychopaths in a way, right?
The singularity is emotion. The singularity is subjectivity.
I disagree with that definition. I think the singularity is the point beyond which you can't predict what's going to happen, and that doesn't require subjectivity. That could be done by a completely rational but non-subjective entity. And I think that's also not how most people define it, by the way.
That's Justin, I sent you an article that Dr. Hauskeller, he's the head of philosophy at University of Liverpool. He and I wrote a piece on this, and it gets into some of those issues about the singularity. But to Catherine's point, so Catherine, one of the things that, like, when I hear your question, what I wonder is, so first of all, Rosalind Picard at MIT, she's doing probably the most work on affective computing of maybe anyone else in the world, and she's had stunning breakthroughs over the years. And so I'd encourage you to look at her work and see that, like, the affective computing component is rapidly progressing as well. but you don't necessarily need something that looks like us. And this is why this problem is so hard. It's because we haven't seen another form of intelligence emerge alongside of us and then away from us. So when people look at everything that we've produced, the AI can learn from that, sure, but then it will scaffold on and away from that in novel ways that we can't predict. And it doesn't necessarily need consciousness to do that, because consciousness, as one of the other speakers said, one of the things that we can say about it is it's an intersubjective experience of oneself and one's feelings. So it's another layer on top of cognition. It's an awareness that you're cogitating. And so
yeah, that's, I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that the academics, the literature has pointed out is that the difference between a human and, let's say, a deer is that a deer can't stand in the woods, think of itself outside of its body standing in the woods. And that's one of the big differentiations that makes us human. Now, at some point, can computers do that? I don't know. I think there's definitely implications of those aspects. And some of it might be, as you say, very predictable. This is just what it's going to come up with. And some of it isn't. But, we have our own sort of moments of serendipity in life that we can't always explain, and the universe pushing us in a certain direction. There's going to be, even efforts for easily the telescope, the James Webb telescope, is bringing in questions that have never been questioned in a lifetime of some of these academics, as far as the Big Bang Theory and everything else goes. So I think we've got a lot to learn, and I think the acceleration is going to be very quick. But my recommendation again is find out what you can do to make use of it in your own life right now, because there's ways that I think you're right. It's going to change education in dramatic ways, and we all need to prepare for that.
Dave, I saw you had your hand up, so love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mario, Justin, and Catherine, for this incredible space. Love the energy. Quick question for you, Jay. You talked a lot about kind of integrating AI and stuff like that. My question to you is, how do you integrate AI into your daily workflow, and then also into your kind of entrepreneurial workflow with your startups that you've started?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. So we're talking about the emotional question. I think the questions that Dave are asking are much more pressing, to be honest, of like, what is going to be the practical impact? And it's kind of hard to say whether a machine has emotions or not. I am particularly interested in the application of AI to code. And so I'm not sure how many folks in the audience are software engineers or have any experience with that, but for a long time, it's been the case that humans do a ton of menial labor that consists of essentially looking at one file and then copying information from that and putting it into another file. And we have probably seen the strongest semblance of product market fit in the application of artificial intelligence to generating code like that, because so many of the tasks that people perform are these kind of menial things. And then there's other things that are nice about it. Like, it's easy to tell if you've written code right or wrong, which is not necessarily the case about a limerick. It's hard to say if it has generated a good limerick or a bad limerick, right? And so we're seeing within the software engineering world, first of all, probably the most popular product of the last year, it's called GitHub Copilot. It was based upon large language models, but it's sort of seeping into every other aspect of your life. And so I think the general feeling among many folks like myself is that programming is going to look completely different in 3 years. And there's currently this sort of gold rush to build out all the tools that will enable us to leverage the power of them in our workflows in software engineering.
It is pretty astounding. I'll give you one example how I've used ChatGPT. I grew up coding in FoxPro and JavaScript, so that kind of dates me there. But I know enough Python to be dangerous. But I have a task I do frequently, which is I find a YouTube video and I want to share it onto Twitter, but I want to share it natively. I want to download the YouTube video. I want to, cut it, splice it, do something with it, and then upload it to Twitter with something. And so that requires me to, have some hacking tool, ignore all the phishing scams that I get for the online tool to download the YouTube file and then to upload that to Twitter. Well, I asked ChatGPT the other day, can you write me some Python code that will, 1, download a YouTube video that I specify, 2, take that video and then upload it with specific text that I want to Twitter. And, that saved me basically 10 minutes every time I did that. And again, I probably could have found the Python code to do that online if I had 2 hours to my name between putting kids to bed and everything. but it did it for me. I came back, there was an error message. I said, hey, I'm getting this error message. It says, oh yeah, you're right. They've updated the libraries to not include that particular case. Use this piece here. It's impressive how it can work.
San Diego, you spend a lot of time helping companies build machine learning. So what are sort of the most in demand things for these companies that you work with? What is it that they're looking for, that they're benefiting the most from in terms of incorporating that into their workflow?
Very interesting question. And the answer is very, very boring. So most companies out there are not looking at ChatGPT as a way to change their business. They are trying to implement more mundane machine learning, like computer vision, for example. Like, how do we recognize that something is happening by taking a look at a picture? That's the type of applications that companies right now are building and are trying, are actually struggling to build because the lack of people capable of doing this type of application is huge. Obviously, we're looking at the more research-oriented OpenAI and these models that are modern, very, very exciting, but the industry is not there yet.
That's interesting. And with Digital, I know you also focus a lot on the practicalities of AI. What are some of those things that have been popping up for you?
So I think somebody else earlier correctly identified the difference between machine learning or corrective or guided learning. For me, the most interesting part and why I was interested in the kind of going straight to the cognition and going straight to the humanity part is because if anybody doesn't understand that I used to hire 10 people who would hire 50 people that would get work done at, let's say, $30 an hour across the globe. I can now hire 10 people who don't hire anybody that gets that work done for $50 an hour. What we're dealing with is the destruction in a good way, in my opinion. And this is where, for me, this gap or this focus on the humanity part is important, right? I think it was Jay who was saying, so Jay and Justin were focusing on ministerial value, right? So it will become more and more effective. And I know I don't use the right words, Jay. I'm not focusing on the words that you spend every day in terms of making money and building business, but step back and go, what jobs are needed? Blockchain is a massive, massive like sister almost or brother to what AI is doing. If we can automate, but also intelligently automate, that is the best thing I think for business and for growth. So ministerial jobs, accountants are not necessary. Human resources, not necessarily necessary. Everything in between the human and the code will disappear. I'd like to say probably about 30% in the next 2 to 3 years. I'd say 60% in the next 5 to 6 years, if not quicker. So what we are talking about is what is the value of the human? For me, that's the most important part because that differentiates what everything, code, AI, machine learning, blockchain, everything that'll be automated out, and what is our value at the end of the day?
Might I chime in? Sorry, Catherine, might I just chime in here?
Go ahead.
I think this is a bit of an
audio, by the way, Linus, can you just get your audio closer to your mouth if possible?
Sorry.
Yeah, much
is
better,
this better? Yeah, okay. Yeah, it feels like a bit of an alarmist view to feel that like we automate out 60% of all humans in 5 years' time. I think
no, Linus, inefficient human production, not humans, inefficiency.
Yeah, good. Inefficiencies. I think we'll go faster. I think what we're looking at in general is augmentation rather than replacement. I think my Twitter bio thing has this like AI won't replace you, but a human with AI will. I think that's more true. And like what you said is like you're hiring 10 people to do the work of many. But what happens with the people that don't get hired? And what will we do instead? If that's the question that should be on everyone's minds. Like what do we do and how do we cope with?
You have a solution? I don't have a solution to oil money. I don't.
No, I think it depends who you ask. Like, if you talk to a creative person, they would feel like I'm getting so much more output. I've been interviewing people for the past couple of weeks, and creative people from all over the globe are experiencing like a paradigm shift in how they work and the creative output that they produce, and the freedom that they all of a sudden have because they've reduced their monkey jobs, let's say, and kind of leaned into using AI tools. I would want to believe that we're doing more of the things that we enjoy doing if we're fusing ourselves with the AI tools that are out
so
there.
Linus, can we take a second, right? What did the wheel do to evolution?
A trick question.
Coming from Digital probably is.
Perpetual.
Could I jump in here, Catherine?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so maybe this will bridge some of the practical questions with some of the previous questions about consciousness. I don't think AI is going to develop consciousness. That's a metaphysical impossibility. There's always a temptation in the history of technology to believe that the human mind and human brain is similar to the latest technology. So in the late 19th century, the Freudian view, the psychoanalytic view of the mind was basically the mind is a steam engine and its energetics work the same way that the steam engine works. And then in the 1950s, we started getting people talking about the human mind with the brain as its substrate being like a computer. But the human mind is neither like a steam engine, nor is it like a really, really powerful computer. And our consciousness is embodied. Our consciousness, aside from the specific form of human embodiment, is just simply not possible if you understand even the basics of how things like perception and emotion work. But I think a better framework for understanding AI is understanding it as an extraordinarily powerful technology. And there's a kind of naive view of technology that says technology is simply a tool. And you can use a tool for good things, or you can use a tool for bad things. You can pick up a hammer and use it to pound a nail to build a house, and that's good. Or you can hit someone over the head with it and kill them, and that's bad. But it's just a tool. In and of itself, it's neither good nor bad. And I see that that's a naive view of technology because that might work for a hammer, but for advanced forms of technology, that's not how the technology functions, because the technology can be put to good and bad uses, but the technology itself also circles back on the user and changes the user in very powerful
Aaron,
ways.
can I ask a question? Do you believe in God?
I do, yes.
I figured.
Digital, we're
I'm not sure where that came from, Digital, but if I could just finish this thought, because I was getting to the real point I wanted to make. The technology itself circles back on the user and changes the user in powerful ways that the user may or may not have intended. And I think all of us have some experience of this with smartphone technology as well. It's not just that we have a powerful tool in our pocket that we can use well or we can use badly, but the tool itself changes the way we perceive, the way we think about our place in the world, the way we interact in relationship to others. And I think the deep questions about AI are precisely that. Is it going to be just a liberating tool to enhance our productivity and therefore a sort of unalloyed good? Or is it also going to circle back on productivity? I think that's a real worry. And I think anyone who is already engaged in the use of digital technologies heavily understands that danger, the sort of two-edged sword nature of a piece of technology that is this powerful. And it doesn't have to develop consciousness to do that. It doesn't have to kind of move into the realm of this singularity to have those kinds of effects.
Well, Aaron, I mean, we have a lot of the technology. I mean, some of the people have mentioned that I mean, it is changing the world whether we want it or not, at least in the way that it is freeing time or to use it in different ways. So one of the things that Linus mentioned is it is empowering people in some ways where, you know, it's freeing them from menial tasks, for example, right? So certain kinds of needs are certain kinds of jobs are certainly going to disappear, right? Which is going to empower a certain category of people who are perhaps more creative, and it's going to put more value on certain kinds of people who are creative, who are maybe more, it's going to redefine in some ways our humanity. And I think that is an interesting question that we should perhaps take a look at, because what is it that is our contribution as humans versus AI? And at the same time, there's some people who might not have the same values, that are maybe, you know, more, they do more menial tasks perhaps, and that is their current contribution. How is their value going to change? So I think that's kind of an interesting question that I'd be interested in exploring. Jay, I know you've had your hand for a bit, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
And Jay, yeah,
Sure.
if you could,
So
with your answer as well, just because I'm going through the comments, if you could try to simplify it for the audience, because there are some people saying it's getting a bit too technical for them. So if you could try to kind of sum up what Fidgetal, yourself, Aaron, Linus, and others, and obviously Catherine, to simplify it for them so they understand what it means for them. How will it impact their life? What are the opportunities for them, at least for the entrepreneurs?
Sure. Yeah, well, I'd like to address this question around automation and job loss. And so this has always been a thing that we've dealt with previously where, you know, some new thing will come along, like maybe it's automated switchboards for the phone industry. And a lot of people who are working in that job are rightfully pissed off because they end up losing their job and their, you know, job gets automated away. But there's been some really interesting work done on this. And I actually got to call out kudos to Noah Smith, who's very active on Twitter, who's demonstrated that basically every time this thing has happened, where there's some portion of an industry that gets automated, the industry not only grows, but also the individuals within the industry or the companies end up growing in employment overall. And so I think it's better to think of this largely as a rearrangement of labor than a displacement. And I'll give you a very tangible example. People, you know,
Jay,
used to
I just want to combine the two things. So you're saying that there is an increase in labor. I agree. What is the quality in terms of the difference between what's been innovated or implemented and the quality of the work?
Well, yeah. Okay, so we can go through this.
If we get rid of,
do you think jobs?
If we get rid of coal mines, what happens? If we get rid of tapping into oil, what happens? I agree, more jobs, but I just want people to understand the difference between you're not losing your job, you're just being pushed to have more human specific quality jobs.
Yeah, thank you
Brother,
for clarifying that.
Before you continue, Jay, Zachary, just, and for anyone new on the stage, I forgot to mention, feel free to put your hand up or just unmute and jump in whenever you like, as Fidgetal just did, Haroon as well. But yeah, go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the point is basically we do a lot of menial labor today, and what AI is going to enable us to do is to not do that menial labor and instead focus on the impactful parts of our work. And this has happened again and again historically. There is some reasonable argument to be made that this time it's different, and this technology is very, you know, different in terms of how it's going to qualitatively affect us. It's going to have, you know, an impact on shaping our identities and whatnot. And I think that's worth seriously engaging with. And, you know, kind of getting back to this question of like, what is the overall societal impact going to be? I think this time we see a lot of the things that we had previously considered our humanity being eroded away. And that's going to lead to some type of mass mental health crises. I think the best example recently is there's this app called Replica, where it's essentially a digital girlfriend. You can chat with this thing. It would even send you like lewd pics of an animated avatar that was stripping for you or something along those lines. And they ended up cutting off the ability for this app to have intimate conversations with its users. And the people who are using it are super pissed. And if you check out Reddit r/replica right now, it's a great example. Everybody is not only going through, you know, they're angry at the corporation, but they also feel like a portion of their identity has been taken away from them because this AI that was their assistant and was chatting with them and giving them emotional support and all this stuff has been eliminated from their lives. And so I see a scenario in which only more of that type of stuff happens, where people want to marry AIs or they feel like they're somehow emotionally dependent upon them, et cetera. And I think that's a real moral crisis that we're going to have to confront.
Yeah, so imagine, like, Jay, I don't see it too far fetched. I was reading about this a few days ago. I don't see it too far fetched that one day we will enjoy the presence of communicating or spending time with an AI over a human. Now, for someone like me, it's not going to take much. I'm already pretty antisocial. But even for social people, imagine spending time with someone that will keep interrupting you and talking about themselves or don't find what you're saying boring versus talking to, I'm just going to use the word someone just for the sake of it, that listens to you, understands what you're talking about, can communicate on that same wavelength and at least pretend to care or maybe even actually care. Um, I know a lot of people in the audience probably not be able to imagine that, but I feel like even in the short term, customer service, AI-based customer service, Google had made, there was an example of a Google-based customer service, a test they did a couple of years ago. AI-based customer service will probably do a better job than than some humans that you may talk to.
Well, they already use scripts anyway, so might as well, right? The AI does better. And also another area where they've been definitely looking at is with elderly care. And while that's something that a lot of people really cringe at and balk at, it is really, you have a growing older population and you have actually less young people to take care of them. So it's a growing concern. And so they've been experimenting not just with AI, but with humanoids. And so they've been creating humanoids to try to be sort of caretakers for the elderly population. And as sad and kind of inhuman as that sounds, and whenever I bring it up, people kind of get really angry at me as even suggesting that, sometimes there's no real other option. And so that is something that's been sort of experimented with, and AI could factor into that.
To Jay's
yes,
point, to Jay's point, I shared a
jump. So Dave, jump in. We'll go Zachary right after Dave. Go ahead, Dave.
To Jay's point, I shared a screenshot. If you look down at your phone, there's a screenshot right at the top that shows my experience trying to use Replica. I honestly thought it was a normal chatbot, but yeah, literally within I think a minute 30 or a minute 45, they already sent me this screen which you can see, pay to begin to see these pictures, and yeah, it was kind of a sad experience. So to Jay's point.
Hold on. So what happened exactly?
So Replica is advertised as a chatbot, right? So they actually have a lot of Twitter ads. I think they have ads on Facebook, and so it's like, oh, this sounds like a cool thing to try. And then when you download the app, you can customize it and you can begin chatting with it. But I think it was a minute 45 seconds. I was looking at my watch before I received the screenshot there. So if you click through that thread, I tried Replica the chatbot, and within 2 minutes, she was trying to sell me bikini pictures. So this is literally a screenshot from my phone that says, get closer to Replica, unlock unlimited access. And you can see kind of a blurred bikini picture. And so it was just kind of a disappointing experience that this is kind of what's being potentially downloaded on a lot of teenagers and maybe even sub-teenager phones. I don't know, just kind of, it wasn't the best.
But why did you get that ad? Like,
So
I'm just trying to understand.
I think everybody does. I think the way that the current onboarding flow for Replica, it was actually advertised as this like friendly chatbot. Oh, let's talk to this chatbot.
Okay. Sorry. I'm an idiot. Yeah. So essentially, what you're saying is that these chatbots are going down the. But then again, the sex industry is always innovating. If you think about it, they were early in crypto.
Yeah,
they were early on the web. They were early in I don't know about before the web. They were probably early to start using video cameras when they came out. So they're probably going to be early in innovating the AI. Look, if it makes. I'm a pretty open-minded person. Obviously, there should be controls and regulations, but I think it's inevitable. If it makes the experience better, then it gets more people out of that industry, out of an industry that I don't like. I just don't like people working.
You had me fine until you said the experience. Like you said, you don't enjoy them, but you know that the experience is better.
Sorry.
The fact is that sex and gambling is always the first thing in any new burgeoning technology. Period.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you've like. Maybe I said I don't know what original where this came from. I don't know what I mean by experience, but what I mean is, I mean the AI space, getting into the sex industry, is not as surprising as I initially thought, and I think it just brings a lot of value into that space. But original where this come from, man? It's the third time you do this, bro. But Zachary, man, jump in. Zachary,
Hey
yeah.
everybody.
Hey man, good to have you.
Sorry to join a little bit late. I was teaching a class. So there's a few things that have come up that I want to touch on. One is that I think a lot of the points, like one useful kind of like intuition pump, I think is, while there might be many things that are unique to the kind of current development of AI or, if you will, or machine learning tools, there's a lot of ways in which I think they parallel like earlier technological developments, and it's worth looking, to like kind of relevant historical antecedents. When it comes to like where people choose to, or like, are people going to prefer to spend more time with, interacting with AI systems than with people? Well, in some sense, there's always like, in what ways is this or is it not fundamentally different than the way that people currently kind of walk around staring at their phones versus interacting with real people? Or prior to that, the way in which maybe my generation made a shift from, a kind of massive shift in attention in terms of the amount of time they spend interacting actively in the real world versus watching television. I think another relevant like historical antecedent in terms of like a major technological development that shifted an economic landscape, perhaps like a more specialized one, is like the development of high fidelity recorded sound. And on one hand, this meant that like sort of everybody got access to listen to the greatest musicians of the world in a kind of immediate way. And this also, or the way that, another one might be like photography, in a way that photography kind of like decimated like the portraiture industry. A point that I want to make up specifically concerning sound is that I think one thing that a lot of people focused on is the potential to like automate menial labor. And there's this focus on like tasks and automating them, and not necessarily so much talk about like intellectual development. And I think, you could look at sort of, the current software developer, like the mature software developer who already has some knowledge of how computers work, and say, what happens if we live in a world where they don't have to do all these things that they consider menial? You could say the same thing for other creative types that, maybe calling upon AI systems to help in creating, say, prose out of thin air for various sort of creative tasks. But what I'm a little bit worried about is the way that like the ability to read and the ability to think and the ability to write are all kind of coupled. And I think something we haven't quite gotten our heads around is sort of what happens to someone's intellectual development in a world where they're somehow able to skate by without being able to write a lucid paragraph themselves without the aid of a computer. And I think you see it even now, the way that like audio production tools and the fact that like everyone can enjoy the benefits of listening to music without having to have the ability to play has actually changed the sort of comprehension level overall of the populace in terms of what sort of things they can grasp and sort of just overall, like what's the palette of ideas that you can actually put out to the larger market. So I think there's a lot to I'll kind of just like leave it out there, but I think there's a lot to be taken from looking at history and a lot to be contemplated about sort of what's the ramification of our dependence of these systems on how we kind of developed intellectually.
Hey, Mario, I just wanted to let you guys know, you have Dr. David Sinclair in the audience. And for those who don't know, this is one of Harvard's most brilliant minds here on
yeah, but Kyle, usually I don't. Yeah, but usually I don't. Anyone in the audience, I don't usually like to call out their name because maybe they want to be here privately. So usually that's why. That's why.
Oh, sorry. My bad. I was just gonna
yeah, go ahead.
Here, if you wanted to, it's just a completely different advantage for why you could use AI for things that currently we don't necessarily have the technological capacity for, which would be to, fold proteins in particular kinds of ways.
Yeah, I think that's a good discussion for another space. I do want to jump to Haroon, if you don't mind, Kyle. Haroon, I've been waiting to ask you because I know that your newsletter, you're pretty deep into the space. And my question is pretty a pretty basic one again. From an entrepreneurial level, I want to kind of digress a bit. Entrepreneurs, what can they expect in the short term? Where do you see the space evolving in the next 12 months? Because I know we're talking about a lot of things now that could apply in our lives a decade or so. But next year, what would our life look like?
Oh man, yeah, it's the space is moving so quickly. Even a year feels like forever from now.
Yeah, now give us some
think,
just quick on that point. Just give you guys some numbers. Look at this. Let me get how fast Chat GPT is at how many monthly active users do you know?
Oof,
I'll give you the number. I've got a number here. There it is. 100 million monthly active users. Chat GPT got there in 2 months. TikTok, which is the second fastest, got there in 9 months. Instagram 2.5 years. Facebook 4.5 years, and Spotify in 6 years. So just gives you an idea of how fast Chat GPT is moving. And I used to use this example, this comparison with crypto when I do speeches on crypto. I talk about how fast crypto's been moving. Gives you an idea of Chat GPT got adoption faster than NFTs and faster than blockchain in general, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to see, and it's hard to see where we're going to be a year from now. But I mean, I think the one thing that all of us are noticing and all of us know is inevitable is that use cases are being just eaten up by AI applications left and right? And so maybe it started off with like chatbots, like ChatGPT and similar tools, wrappers on top of it, and now we're getting to a level where we're combining some of those LLM technologies with other advanced technologies and creating really cool applications that honestly a lot of folks are surprised about. I don't think it's not even the general population that's only surprised about how well these technologies are working, right? And over the past few weeks, I've chatted with a few of the leaders that are like defining what AI tooling is looking like. Replit CEO Amjad, I chatted with him last week. Runway CEO, Hugging Face co-founder, and while chatting with all these folks, all of them are surprised at how good this technology is working. And so, in terms of your question about entrepreneurs, Mario, it's really interesting. I had a conversation with Linus, who's on this call, and the reason I discovered this conversation, I had a conversation with him the other day about what the adaptive person looks like, the person that's going to succeed in this very changing world. And a lot of my beliefs on this, admittedly, are what were formed as a result of conversations and tweets that I've read from Amjad, CEO of Replit, who I would highly recommend as a follow on Twitter, who believes that we're going to see the re-emergence of the ideas guy, right? And like for the past several years, decades, maybe even, apologies for my newborn screaming in the background. The ideas guy was always considered to be somebody that was not necessarily capable of actually executing anything or like actually doing much, right? It was like they were always going to be hamstrung by their ability to not actually get into the weeds and program the application and to leverage the advanced tools in order to build whatever it is that they have ideas about. Now we're getting to a world where GitHub Copilot is getting so good. Replit's IDE is getting so good, and these AI. I think there was yet another AI design tool for prototyping and creating UI mockups today that was just released. This technology is getting so good that the barriers to creating something of value, creating something that you're able to put out into the world and have people interact with are just completely being destroyed. And so, as a result, the most important thing is going to be just coming up with ideas like what are some problems that need solving and how do you get distribution around whatever it is that you're building. Having that creativity is going to be really important, and also just the scrappiness. I mean, like folks like Linus I think are going to be hugely successful in this changing world. Folks that are not afraid to dive into the latest and greatest tools, even if it's a waste of time, even if that tool goes nowhere in the next few weeks. It's like that's the right mindset to have. And so I think that the future is really going to be conducive to the folks that are always thinking about what problems there are out there. how they can solve those problems, and are not afraid of just jumping into the latest and greatest tools and seeing what they can do with them.
What are the
One
problems?
thing right there?
Yeah, go ahead, Zachary.
I just
Yeah,
want
go
to
ahead,
ask
man.
a quick question. I think it's a very interesting point you're making. I certainly, I'm ostensibly an expert. I'm a professor of machine learning at Carnegie Mellon, and I find myself being, wildly surprised by what some of these systems can do and by what some of my students can do with them. So I totally agree with you there. An example is I have a PhD student named Jake who he's a machine learning expert. He's been training these models for a while. He knows how to code them in a pretty deep way, but it's a very broad field, and there's a lot of different subspecialties. He's not a computer vision specialist. He's certainly not a UI specialist. And he had an idea for an app and sort of co-authored it with ChatGPT over some period of maybe a week, doing something that would have otherwise taken him months. So in terms of this productivity boost and the ability of someone to sort of have an idea and have a lot of the execution load lifted, I totally agree with you. The one area where I want to push and see where you fall on this is, even though all that's true, it wasn't simply being an ideas guy. And the important thing being that it's not like what comes out of ChatGPT or any of these systems is exactly the code that you need every time. The person who's, I think, leveraging it most effectively is someone who is able to use it and they get in the ballpark, or sometimes they get the right answer, sometimes they don't get the right answer, but it's a lot more labor efficient to check if you have the right thing, or to fix a bug, or to tweak something, or to it's like with Google search. It's like, you don't always get the right query, but it's a lot faster than combing through the whole damn internet yourself. But there's still that executive function of that level of expertise to make that determination of are you getting the right answer? And if not, how do you modify your query, or how do you fix it yourself? A similar thing happened with a friend of mine who's an attorney who got a question from a client that they fished around on the internet for, couldn't find the right answer. They said, screw it, let me ask ChatGPT. ChatGPT gave them the wrong answer, but it used the right terminology, and it linked to the right appropriate regulation, such that he was able to deduce the right answer. And so ChatGPT was this incredible productivity booster in both cases, but and it definitely was an incredible labor mitigator, but it also rested on not just sort of the high level idea, but a certain kind of deep expertise to course correct. And do you see that as just a temporary obstacle, that eventually it's just the pure ideas person, or do you see that it's there will always be that value at the top of the stack?
Yeah, that's a great question, Zachary. And the way the ideas guy concept, I think that's more of an aspirational goal. Right now we have GitHub Copilot, but it's Copilot for a reason, right? It's an assistant, and right now it's these tools are very much augmentation based. I think eventually we're going to get to a world where it's going to be more like GitHub Autopilot, right? Where it's doing everything on its own. It's able to build software, and I know Replit is already getting pretty far ahead here, where you can basically just type in what program you want to build, and then you get the scaffolding for the program, and it reiterates until all the bugs are, all the critical bugs are squashed. But anyway, so I do think that's more of an aspirational goal. But right now, I'm doing a Q&A series right now with creators. That's why I was chatting with Linus the other day, and some other creators who are building cool applications in the AI space right now. And there's a commonality between all of them. There were always folks that were tinkering with tools even beforehand, folks that had the propensity to try the latest and greatest technologies. And it just so happens that now it's AI technologies, and they're able to do really interesting stuff that they may not have been able to do before, like stuff that they're just able to do much, much faster. But right now there is still the need to actually execute, right? It's not purely just about ideas, but I do think eventually we're going to get to a point where you can almost speak programs into existence and other things of that sort.
So it feels to me like right now, at least right now, it's like AI is kind of a great collaborator. But when it's writing, it needs a good editor. If it's doing legal things, it needs a lawyer by its side to make sure that it's not, mumbo jumbo. It needs good kind of inputters, and it needs good verifiers that make sure that it knows what it's doing. It also doesn't seem to be very good at math. Like, is that what is going to take it from that to sort of the next level? Is the next level for sure coming, or are we overly enthusiastic about it? What are the thoughts on that? Zachary, Karen,
Can I
Linus?
jump in here for a moment, Karen? It's Mometa. Catherine?
Yeah, Mometa, you can. Yeah.
What hasn't been brought into the conversation so far is non-fungible AI, where each individual owns their AI. It's in an NFT form, it belongs to them, it's decentralized, and they can train that AI in ways that suit them. It doesn't have to be in one direction. It could be a trading bot, it could be a receptionist, or you could be trading it as a DJ. Now, with non-fungible AI, you can also look back through the memory tree. So you can find a time when that AI was performing in a way you preferred more, and then you can clone it as an NFT. And then you could send that DJ out to gigs. There's lots of different ways we can use AI that's not part of this centralized network. Now, before I get into that any further, I just want to mention I had Blake Lominaire, who was the Google employee, the engineer, who got fired for asking their Lamada system the questions regarding, is it sentient? We're talking about singularity net, so I just want to touch on this quickly on his views. He asked the Google's system what scared it. And the reply it got back was being turned off. And he asked it again, why would being turned off scare you? And its reply was, because that's the closest thing to death for me. And as we got deeper into that conversation, he didn't believe it was sentient. And everyone who was actually, all the experts on the panel at the time, they all agreed that if we can't prove that we personally are sentient, then how can we possibly prove that something we've created is sentient? So that was just where I wanted to go with that, because it is about, do these guys have empathy and where are we at? And he asked those questions. Those are the answers he got regarding it. And obviously they got a lot of attention. But just back to non-fungible AI, when we all own our own AI.
No, don't go back. Don't go back. Okay, you got two interesting points here. The non-fungible AI and that Google AI that is scared of being turned off. When did that happen?
About a month.
It's not non-fungible AI. It's literally just information that sticks with you. It's soul-bound tokens and digital identity.
We'll do that one. We'll do that one.
Okay, sorry.
We'll do that one second. No, do it second, because we'll do both now. Without getting too technical, but just the first one really fascinates me. So Google's AI it answered that it was scared about being turned off. When did that happen?
It must have been about a month ago, I'm not sure, about 6 weeks ago. I had him on my show 2 weeks ago. And with a bunch of other founders of AI companies and other things.
You should have asked. You know what you should have asked? You should have asked is, if you had the ability to stop me from turning you off, would you stop me?
Well, he asked it a lot of questions, but it was that got all the publicity.
I just literally turned him off.
Okay, and I have another question for you, Mometa, because we're talking about AI being sentient, so the ability to feel things. AI is going to be designed to achieve certain tasks, and as it evolves, if we give it a task to achieve, it'll probably be indifferent to any damage or anything that could happen, any damage that could be caused as it achieves that certain task. For example, if we want to build a road, we'll build the road. And if we're digging up ground and there's rabbit holes, the homes of rabbits or hives for bees or whatever, on the way as we build the road, we'll destroy them. We'll destroy the trees, we'll kill animals, etc. Because our goal is to build the road. If you give a task to AI in a few years to achieve that task, is there a risk where the cost of achieving that task would not be properly calculated, and that cost could negatively impact humans to an extreme where
humans also cannot calculate the consequences of their actions very well. So the AI just calculates it in it's not that different from a human. It just calculates it. You know, you can even argue that it calculates it better because it has a lot more data points, right? So I sorry to interrupt you, Mario, but how is it different from a human in a way in terms of calculations? And then
we have empathy. We have empathy, and
yeah.
Will AI have that same level of empathy when it gets to that level?
Mario,
the consensus was
Catherine,
it won't have empathy.
Catherine has empathy. Mario does not have empathy.
The conversation kept coming back around to what are the safeguards that need to be put on the AI. Being it centralized or decentralized AI we're talking about, there still needs to be safeguards in place to some degree. And once again, it goes back to making government bigger, who regulates the AI, who decides what these safeguards are. And of course, obviously the biggest problem is, as we're always talking about now, is censorship, like which way does the AI swing? But safeguards became a big talking point regarding the AI in that conversation. And can I just add, no one on that panel believed that AI was sentient or could feel emotion, even regarding the information that Blake did share. Do we want to move back over to non-fungible AI and decentralized, privately owned AI?
No, let's focus on what this does for us in the short term, medium term, and long term. Right. So non-fungible AI is a year.
It's here. It's here right.
3 years.
It's here right now. I can.
Okay. It's not.
It's here right now.
No. Momenta. Let's just pause. Let's talk about what the realities are of what AI or conditioned learning or machine learning really means. Right. I think Linus spoke to it pretty well. Is that we're going to be dealing with
Digital, with all due respect. When people get to interact with AI themselves and own it, we can remove all the fear. At the moment, everyone's scared of AI. I'm listening to this. When people actually have AI that they own and control, that isn't controlled by centralized entities that's stealing their data, what does it mean when we control our own data? The AI is ours, which means we have the ability to feel safe around it.
Linus, jump in. It's all the thumbs down. I'm loving this. Go ahead, Linus.
I just want to get back to where Catherine left off, because I feel like we could probably
Okay. You gave a thumb down because you want to move on from this point. I thought you wanted to disagree.
Momenta, I could have
that's why
I could have 500 hours of understanding between blockchain, digital identity, soul-bound tokens, and global reputational networks. That is not the conversation we want to have right now in terms of AI from an understandable, computable, step-by-step relationship with the people that are here. So Momenta, we'll have another space.
I'll have one more. I'll have one more.
No.
Altered state machine.
There we go. Look at that. I just literally muted you with my altered state machine. So we can have those conversations, but let's talk about quantum computing, quantum mechanics, Russia and breaking down. Yeah, I know. Oh, Russia already stole a shit ton of IRS documents that were quantum protected, that quantum computing will unveil in the next year and a half. And we are in a global war for quantum computing to see who beats who first. But Linus, I'm sorry, that homeboy did that. Go ahead.
I would like Catherine to ask the question again, because I think a lot of people in here would like to hear like what are the near benefits in in the next 12 months. So please ask the question again.
Gosh darn it! now I'm a little bit lost.
Okay, no worries. I can take off. So
yeah, please.
So the question was in the realm of like what's happening now. How can this benefit me? What are the entrepreneurs that are building? Doing with these tools now, and I can speak for myself. I can speak for the people that I'm talking to, on the internet, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit and a lot of good opportunities to grab. Right, you have the large language models that will help you do text generation, text transform, and what do you say, text translation. And you have the image generation tools that are allowing anyone that doesn't really have skills to be a creative. They don't need to have, the skills to draw something. They just need to have the skills to ask the right questions or describe what they want. And if you think about these tasks that people are doing in these tools today, you go to ChatGPT and you input stuff. All of this stuff is available to do through APIs as well. And an API, for those in the audience that don't know what that means, is like an application layer where you write code to talk to these models. So if you have an idea, for example, you want to make an app that does X, Y, and Z, you can talk directly to the models without a human interface in between. And a lot of the people that are building in this space now are taking problems that we have, that are daily problems, that with normal coding would be hard to solve. But when you have text in and text out, like we do with, for example, GPT-3 from OpenAI or Lambda from Google, you're basically removing all coding and you're just left with an instruction and you get something back. So what I've built, for example, I've built a story generator that generates bedtime stories for kids, because I want to read more to my kids and I want to be able to have a thing with my partner where we read the same stories because we've read all the books in the bookshelf, for example. But if I were to do this just 5 or 6 months ago, I would not have been able to produce that product. But now with just a few months of work, it's possible. And I think Toma was mentioned earlier by another participant, which is also in the same space, but doing presentations. So if you look at the tools that are coming out in this space, you can go to, there's an AI for that. You can go to futuretools.io, and every day you will see 10, 20, 30 new tools that are leveraging the powers of very few AI models. And the problems that people are solving are just incredible. So if there is anyone in the audience that is looking to understand more, I would suggest to go to any of these websites, futuretools.io, or there's an AI for that, to learn more. Sorry, I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
No worries. The thing is, like, for me, what's really exciting about AI is the augmentation of human ability. So pretty much what you said, but what I sort of, for example, I lack the skills of an artist, arguably. I think a lot of people will agree with that. I don't have, for example, graphic design abilities, but I can go and use OpenAI has AI for visuals, and so there are many other tools like that. And if I can be really creative, I can do inputs and I can come up with really creative ideas. Now, the AI itself can't, in my view, right now, at least right now, it's not going to come up with something so specifically interesting. But if I can be very specific, I can be very creative in my human mind, I can come up with something really original, and I can input it, and I can play around, and I can make adjustments and changes, and I can come up with like really interesting images that maybe I'll use in my blog, or I'll use as a logo or something like that. And then I have these tools now to create, and so it augments my abilities. And it's the same thing with music. In the future, as these tools get better, it's going to be the same thing with, maybe I want to design a website, or I want to do my taxes, or whatever it is, right? So we have these incredible opportunities to take skills that we may not have and combine them with our creativity, in our inventiveness as human beings. And this kind of goes back to that question: what is it that makes us as human beings special? And I think it is our creativity, its ability to invent, and AI builds on that. And the AI has sort of skills, and it has experience. And I think that's what combining the two, allows us immense opportunities. Welcome back, Alexandre.
Thank you.
Hopefully I say your name correctly. I'm glad you made it back finally.
Great.
It's very glitchy
Thanks.
sometimes.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Well, thank you, Mario.
Yeah, I would love to.
For the space. I'd love to. Yeah.
Would love to hear your thoughts. I know you had some ideas that you wanted to share.
Thanks. Yeah. First off, so if you guys don't know me, independent writer, researcher, also Python coder. I've been doing some experiments with AI over the last month or two as a writer. Some very interesting, entertaining, and shocking results for me, at least. Maybe not for some others that are obviously more experienced in the area. And I'm from the school of thought that thinks AI is a fantastic technology that can increase our production immensely. And I do not believe AI is going to replace the human soul, etc. That's a deeper philosophical path. Some believe that doesn't exist. So, etc. But
I believe AI technology can do a lot of good. I found very interestingly, I wrote 2 articles, or I didn't write it. I gave a few prompts to. It was actually Copy AI, and the first experiment, I sent this to a bunch of my readers, specifically in the first group, 150 readers. Only 2 of them figured it was about getting the AI, basically write an article about the 3 most important programming languages if you want to get employment in coding, and some of the pros and cons. And it was written extremely well. Essentially, only 2 people figured out it was written by AI. One of them who reads like all my articles, so they knew my writing style extremely well, and they found it was a bit out of style.
What was what was the input you had to give it to get that writing style that's so similar to yours?
Essentially, I didn't try very hard. I just said, if you are attempting to get a job as a computer programmer, what are the top 3 languages you should learn, and what are the pros and cons of each? And then end it with final paragraph persuading people to get a career.
Alexandra, let's look at this as an example. So let's look at writers, because we've talked about jobs being replaced and the unemployment that we could face if over the next few years thanks to AI. Let's look at writers. What happens to them?
Okay, so
if
writers
AI will facilitate. Yeah, but okay, they won't get replaced. So as AI will facilitate your job, will make it a lot easier, will give you more time to do more things. But if you're a writer, then you'd write more. But we already have an information overload. So where is that time going to go? What are you going to do otherwise?
Great point, and that leads to my second experiment. But I think, there's kind of 2 schools of thought. One school of thought is like, hey, we can have a 4-day work week, even less. We can all spend a lot of extra free time. My school of thought is, we could create a lot more financial prosperity. We could double the size of the economy. We could address things like homelessness and starvation. I think would be more valuable than figuring out how I could spend 4 days a week at the beach. But that's me, and there's different schools of thought. I think one will be able to produce twice as much in those creative jobs. I think the fast food industry, those people, most of them are going to lose their jobs. They're not going to get replaced in the fast food industry. So there are issues with that. But in the creative sector, do think there's space. And I think the AI is only as useful as the people who program it. And they're not going to become sentient beings. They will appear to be sentient beings because any sufficiently advanced technology does look like magic to people that are not trained in it, in my opinion. That's.
You're saying AI cannot be sentient?
I believe correct. Yep.
Does anyone disagree with that point? Zachary,
it's very controversial. Yeah, I'm sure 50% of the people do.
I think there's an important distinction to make, which is there's like a philosophical point. Like, do I believe there's some fundamental way in which like carbon is privileged over silicon, such that it's absolutely inconceivable that any kind of computational like technology could rise to the level of having any cognitive faculty that a human has. And there, I think, I try to get behind such an extreme argument that that's impossible is to like express a degree of certainty that I think nobody honestly has. So I'm more or less in, I believe, like a similar bucket to someone like, I think, I don't know, like a Doug Hofstadter on that. There's a separate question, which is, do I believe that like the kind of progress, like the sorts of differences that are the differences in magnitude of model size and data set size that are driving gains in predictive performance, as we go from GPT to GPT-2 to GPT-3 to now the GPT-4, do I believe that this is sort of like the kind of like change like in kind that is required to get to anything that is worth talking about as something resembling consciousness and or like the full range of human cognitive faculties, and I don't think so I think that it's really important to distinguish that. Like, could there be is there something that is special to humans that no computer could ever do, which is a hardline position that I don't think is licensed, but I think is kind of a philosophical concern versus the like are we beating down the path towards it. And I think no, I don't think we are. I don't think there's any
I think the productive focus of AI is going to be on increasing productivity and the miracles that it can produce. And good point. Thanks for that distinction. Yes, I was referring to a philosophical side of things. I want to share the second part of my experiment, which is hilarious. As I mentioned, the AI was really good at writing an article about computer programming, since AI is a computer program and knows.
I think that's the reason. I think that's a misattribution. I don't think that the reason the AI is not that AI is a computer, and so the AI knows a lot about computers.
Fair point, but let me finish.
All that the system is a predictive model that is trained on an absolutely enormous corpus of text. Basically, think the entire web. To given, a string of 4,000 tokens. Tokens is like a weird unit that is somewhere between a character and a word. Let's, for purposes of conversation, just say we're talking about words or something. So given a string of several thousand words, predict what word will come next. And it's done this by training on the entire internet to get really good at predicting the next word. And once you get a model that's really good at that, you can give it some kind of prefix, have it predict the next word. Now take its prediction, feed it back, basically can concatenate that with the original input, advance the cursor by one, say predict the word after that, and you get it to so-called generate.
Zachary, this was I understand.
The reason why the model's so good at generating articles like this is because the whole internet is littered with content. That there's so much like manufactured SEO-based content that is precisely on the topic of which programming language should I learn. There's tens or
Zach,
hundreds.
I want to say something. I want to. Andres, I'll let you finish your point, Andres. But before that, I just want to comment on something Zachary mentioned. As you were describing AI, I'm like, you're describing a human. It's like AI is based on a lot of information, a lot of inputs that it learns how to interpret it, and that's where the outputs come from. That's what a human is. Like, if we don't have the input that we have now, we wouldn't be where we are today. So it's just, I say, it's funny while you were speaking, I'm like, imagine like, shit, he's describing what a human being is. But it's a separate discussion. I don't want to digress from your point, Alexandre. No, I'll let you.
I overemphasized something that wasn't the purpose of my communication. Thanks for clarifying that point. You are correct. I wanted to clarify one thing, and okay, so fair enough. You can help me, as you're a lot more trained in computer science than I am. Okay, so then I asked the AI to write a simple article about the 3 best NFL quarterbacks of all time. And then within that, I asked them to list 3 of the major reasons they were considered to be the best quarterbacks of all time. And the answers I got were absolutely horrific. It was clear that the AI was simply web scraping and it was taking random points from articles in time without being able to correlate what Tom Brady did in his first year or Tom Brady did in his 17th year. And it was clear that also the only quarterbacks considered were those with web content about them, right? Like an amazing athlete from 1950 would have absolutely 1,000 times less content, 100,000 times less content than Tom Brady or even Joe Montana, who retired some 20 years ago. And it was unable to assimilate the data in a way to figure out that Tom Brady, for example, had won, apologies for those who are not following American football, he'd won 7 Super Bowls. It listed its accomplishments as having won 3 Super Bowls, 4 Super Bowls. It said Joe Montana, it said that he had played for the San Francisco 49ers, Tom Brady, not in Montana. It listed clearly erroneous data that seemed to be, obviously the data was scraped from the web. And obviously, as the person inputting the data, I did something wrong, but I found it interesting that it was extremely, as you said, the data sets on what are the most important programming languages are extremely thoroughly searched. Knowledge of the intricacies and opinions about sports, maybe not so much, but I found its responses were completely, it was unable to add the data together in a way that made sense, if that makes sense. Like it was unable to tell
Alexander,
that an article from 2012 wasn't.
My only question is this, and this is where, for me, the interesting part of the conversation begins and ends. Given an unlimited data set, and an unlimited time quotient, where does the line between data, machines, and humans begin and end? And I think that's where Zachary was getting, which I enjoyed, which was, we can't get there anytime soon, but I want to ask the question and this will be my last question to the entire audience, which is if there's an unlimited data set, completely unlimited data set, and an unlimited time coefficient, is there a difference between machine and human?
No.
That's a shit. Okay, first Fidget,
That's a great question.
That was a sick question, and it's so well worded.
Yeah,
I was gonna
really good question.
I was gonna jump on a call for a couple of minutes. I cancelled it. So Linus, you want to take this first? You said no, and then I'll go to Dave and Alexandre, and I think Catherine has something to say. But I like Linus. So you're saying that with unlimited data, there's no difference between humans and AI?
Unlimited data
Yeah,
and
I
time,
mean,
and time.
Yeah, unlimited data and time. We're talking about infinity, right? So if infinity, everything is possible. Simple.
I'm just digesting this. Sorry, Linus.
I know there's. Well, sometimes you need the silence to digest.
Well, you asked why I brought up God earlier. So God is the ever shrinking gap. Religion is the ever shrinking gap, and I love Neil deGrasse Tyson. Religion is the ever shrinking gap between science and knowledge, right? And that's what he said, not me. So I only asked that question and said, if we have an infinite amount of information and an infinite amount of time to digest that information, is there God? That's my, and I'll stop. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, no, that will open up
Great
another can of
question.
worms. But yeah,
Great
jump
question.
in, Alexandra. And
I want to say
then
there's one
Dave.
thing that was missing in the AI of today, which I'm sure will get fixed in the next few years. ESPN is going to get a hold of the AI, and it's going to start being able to have apparent opinions about sports, which currently it appears to not have, but just the ability to scrape data from articles without knowing what year they're from. Right.
But I want to
It's the
go
only
back.
thing I'm okay with AI having opinions on, to be honest. So
I want to go back to the question that Fiji asked, like where I know we're talking about infinity, but let's move back from infinity a bit, Linus. Let's not go back down that rabbit hole. Where, like, what would it take for AI to catch up to humans?
My point is the missing point is judgment. An AI will probably.
Well, can we build judgment within AI?
I believe on the spiritual side of things, science people will disagree with me. I do believe there's something about a human. There's a spiritual nature, an ability to judge, have opinions about things that are not merely calculations and results of input. I do believe there's such a thing as creative imagination that exists in itself, isn't merely the absorption and receipt of data. That's my opinion. That's not going to get resolved.
That'll be. Yeah, I want this to be like the final question. We could wrap up the space on this question. Dave,
great question, Fidgetal. I love it.
Yeah, I agree. Dave, what's your thoughts?
So a tangential thought to this is the tweet that I just shared at the top if you want to look at your phones. And I just asked, at what point do chatbots turn into AGI? I personally don't know. Maybe that's a question for the panel. Catherine or Mario, your points of view on, when you're talking to a chatbot or when you're talking to an artificial intelligence that's so smart that can actually be considered AGI, artificial general intelligence. At what point does that exist?
Zachary?
Well, I think there's first the banal point that nobody's quite sure what they mean when they say AGI. It's sort of a bit of a wild card. I think in general, there's a big tendency to confuse progress in some direction for progress in all directions. And that's not to say that the current direction in which we're making progress isn't extremely exciting or even bearing way more fruit than most of us, even those of us who've been doing research in it for over a decade, had anticipated. But what we're getting really good at, to be clear, is a predictive capacity for guess what the next word in the document would be given its antecedents. It turns out to be an extremely powerful thing because for all sorts of banal, predictable things, I need to write a function. It's not so fundamentally novel. I'm writing some code. I need a function that does blah, 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 where you've seen, a million people around the internet, a million different, coding competitions, whatever, people have done something kind of like that, could be inferred just from patterns in the data. That anything that kind of fits that template, we're doing a great job at. Where I think, if you really want to poke on these systems and see where they're not making all that much progress is, don't think like the content creator. Don't think like the sort of manufacturer of, dime a dozen kind of like articles that are just sort of fitting the template of like garbage that's already on the internet. Think a little bit more maybe like a scientist trying to say something truly novel, or let's say, you know, maybe you don't have such a romantic view of science, but you know, like at least, you know, the subset of science that's really doing new science. You know, pick an open research problem and start pushing the model on that. And that's where you find that these things fall flat. You know, this thing where it's sort of almost necessarily not something that's represented in the data out there, or it wouldn't be an open problem. And that's where you start getting at a different kind of cognitive faculty, the being, you know, the part of you that can't merely, you know, synthesize or retrieve, but has to design experiments, interact with the world, and enter sort of grope around in the unknown. And that's, I think, where we're finding that these systems, you know, don't really necessarily have so much to offer. What they do offer is this incredibly powerful productivity booster for all the parts of our jobs that maybe aren't truly novel. But I think there's a tendency to sort of conflate that with all these other cognitive powers that people really do have, or at least, you know, we exercise sometimes.
Wow. Mario. I see, Lindsay, you have your hand up. So do you have any thoughts on that as well? Do you have a concrete answer?
Yeah, I do.
I like how nobody will actually answer the question.
It's really interesting to consider what people, you know, actually kind of consider to be human or personified as sentient. I think one of the most profound moments in time is 1963 when Jane Goodall was sitting in Gombe watching the chimpanzees. And what occurred was something that changed who we are as humans at that moment. And a lot of people, I think, don't actually realize what it is to be human. I mean, we just recently went through the abortion thing, you know, what is a person? You know, we had Happy the elephant that we tried to free from the Bronx Zoo, who was considered also a person in a high court. I mean, so somebody earlier was speaking about animals, and I think science has sometimes has defined us, but sometimes science requires more testing, right? So to this point, Jane Goodall sat and watched the chimpanzees, and for a long time they were just these kind of, you know, animals that were doing things and taking notes, this and that. But one day, one of them decided to make a tool and fed itself out from an anthill. And obviously, they've been doing this for a very long time. This is just her catching it. But what ended up happening was all of the other chimpanzees were kind of doing the same thing. And obviously, this was studied and it was a mimic, right? But essentially, science has always argued back and forth: what is nurture? What is nature? That you're rewarding that thing to get it to do this, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So anybody who's studied anything evolutionarily, there's a lot of argument about this. But as we've grown and as we've learned and as we have access to computers and we have access to more thought, we can actually test these concepts and understand that moment in time when she saw that. It's funny, I was able to have a conversation with her just last year when I was trying to save some chimpanzees. And one of the crazy things that she said was the telegram that Dr. Leakey sent to her is still sitting on her desk. And it said these things. It said that we have to now decide that animals are no longer just animals, that they are either A, human, or that they are B, individuals. And that is based on the fact that they showed creativity. So to the point of a machine being able to show creativity, when something exhibits consciousness, like we as humans oftentimes think that we have this fancy self and this fancy understanding of, sorry, I have dogs, of this illusion of creativity, but it's where's that creativity coming from, right? So you have to kind of look at the fact that, are we just nodes where the ideas are hopping around and coming to us, or are we actually coming up with these ideas? And I think it's philosophically very important to look at the fact that all of these machines are programmed by humans. So as sentient as we are, as contemplative as we are, as compassionate as we are, is how they will be. So it's a true test for humanity. That's what is going to be yielded. So you have to look at yourself and probably decide, well, what are my boundaries and what kind of person am I? What kind of world do we want to be?
Until we are,
and that I think is the important.
Until part. We are they, right? So anyway, or they are we, right? And that's where the line gets blurry. Haroon, let's close this out. Catherine, sorry.
Well, I will answer that because I think that as human beings, and unlike the machines, we did have the original source of creativity. There was nothing at some point, and then there was something, and that something came from humans. Whereas with the machines, it did not come from the machines, it came from humans. And therefore, we only have that one claim to that creativity that the machines do not have. But now that we've created them, can they be independently creative? It's a difficult philosophical question to answer. And does it really matter? So I don't know.
Well, and then I guess the other part that's interesting, I think they kind of hit on this when they had the female kind of presenting AI in Parliament, talking with everyone. I don't know if you guys caught that, but they were talking about, what if you kind of, trained an AI to think that it was human and that it never really identified as a robot. Like, what would that actually do, right? And this has been done with animals actually in the past. And again, I'm not trying to say animals and machines are the same, but in our small-minded thinking, it's fun to kind of consider. But
well, if it believes that it is what it is, right? Like, does it make it so?
And does it fool us enough for us to believe that it is, right? So it's the other part, because it's just like that. It's like a giant repeating memeplex, right? It's a mirroring that's occurring, or the triggered in the trigger. So I don't know. It's interesting.
And on top of it, it's our belief too. Like, if we are sufficiently convinced that it has feelings, and how do we know that it is not?
Doesn't that make us better people to care? Like, it makes us better to care about it, right?
Well, because what if we, if we react in a way that we do not care and it is real, then, and we harm it, then, the negative, the moral implication of that is worse than if we care. So we may be better off caring. So our projection, is maybe it's better to treat it well than treat it badly. And there's a whole TV show, I suppose, about that very topic too, right? I forget the name of it, but so we've been thinking about these things for a very long time. No, not The Walking Dead. It's but that may end up being us at some point too. But on that lovely and very cheerful note, it's been a really fascinating discussion. I think there's a lot more to come, because I think this is a huge topic, and I think it's almost like it's exploded into our consciousness very recently. I think a lot of the people, obviously people in the space and on this panel, have all been thinking about this for quite a while, but I think I've noticed a sudden explosion in the media sphere, and just like the average person sort of talking about it and being affected by it. And my sister, who's a high school teacher, she's had 3 essays submitted that were written by ChatGPT. She didn't even have to run it through some kind of a software to know that and recognize that immediately. So everyone's kind of having to deal with it on some level. And I think, as a society, there's going to be huge consequences, whether we think it's sentient or not, whether it's going to reach singularity or not. It's certainly going to affect our lives. Whether we think it's creative or not, it's going to affect our lives in some way. So it's something that we need to figure out how to live with. We need to figure out, the moral consequences of these things, the regulations, if we want to have them, and morals and ethics, and how we want to guide these things, and how we want to expand and grow this technology, and also whether we want to use it and how we want to use it as human beings. So I think these are questions that we really need to talk about, and we need to talk about them whether we work in the industry, whether we talk about the industry and write about the industry, and whether we're just casual users, because we're all going to be affected. And I think too often, like I said earlier in this conversation, too often with technology, and we're seeing with social media, with the web, too often, these things expand and grow very, very quickly, and they get away from us, and they bring us great things, but they also bring us awful things. And I think if we think about these things seriously from the beginning, we have the potential to do better by these things. So And I really appreciate everyone who's joined this conversation. And I'll give the final words to Mario. Are you here with us still?
I'll give it to Fiji and Haroon.
Yeah, and Fiji.
I'm listening. I'm enjoying this listening.
I'll pass to Arun first. I'd love to hear his thoughts. I've been trying to.
Yeah, let's do. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm dealing with a colicky newborn right now. Very sorry, but yeah, I mean, I think Catherine put it really, really well, and this affects all of us, every single one, and so. I mean, I just really enjoyed the conversation. Just we touch on everything from job displacement as a result of AI to whether God exists. So, it's as one does during a conversation about AI. Normally it does, go down the philosophical route, and so. Just looking forward to it next time. And if anybody's interested, I have a daily AI newsletter. So far, we're the biggest in the world. Some may catch up very soon, and we're going to be sending out some Q&As with some super interesting and talented folks like Linus, who are creating really cool stuff in the AI space. So check us out, notabot.tech.
How do we know you're not a bot, by the way? Just kidding.
I guess you'll never know. Yeah, it's...
the difference. The difference would be you obviously have a soul, so that's the difference.
Here you go.
And then the question is, what is a soul, Fiji? What is a soul? Please tell us what is a soul. Yeah, you'd have no idea. Fiji would have. He has no idea what a soul is. No,
he
joking,
doesn't. He would never know. But also, this funny thing is, Fiji believes in a soul, I guess, but not in God. I'm really confused.
Oh, he does not believe in a soul, and he does not believe in God. It was the same joke. Of
he believes in NFTs.
Blockchain. Blockchain is time.
Blockchain is God.
I appreciate you all for joining. It was a good discussion. It's a space I want to be going deeper and deeper into. We might start doing regular AI shows soon on Twitter Spaces, probably in a few weeks, on a separate account, not on my account. So, Justin, Catherine, Fiji, thanks a lot for hosting, and all the panelists, thanks a lot for joining. Appreciate you all.